Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming here. And it's been a great conference. It's been a pleasure to be here. And I know it's Friday, the food kicked in, hopefully the caffeine kicked in at the same time, but we'll keep the talk short, like about 45 minutes or so. And after the talk, I'll be hanging out around here or outside. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. So throughout the course of this talk, I'll probably introduce a lot of terminology. Some you might have heard, some you might have not, some practices. Some of them are talk within their own, so don't worry about if you're not familiar. Just catch me outside or connect with me, and we'll just dig through and talk about them. So I want to start telling you a story about when I was growing up. I actually was born and raised in Tehran, Iran, during Iran-Iraq war. So I'm a child of a war. And I was about 6 years old when the war ended. And as you can imagine, when you go through war and after war, the luxury and the comfort is not top of your mind, right? Maybe top of my parents' mind, or some people could afford this, but majority of the people, they weren't. It was safety, it was comfort, it was building economy. But as a kid growing up around that time, I didn't care. I wanted to get out of the school and go get my ball and go out and kick some ball and play soccer. So soccer in Iran is actually pretty important. It's everybody plays it. We go teams and teams against teams and street against street. But as you can imagine, we didn't have a really nice soccer field and grass and jerseys, and half the time we had flip-flops, and the toes get caught. Oh well, you have Neosporin stuff to bandage it up. A lot of time, actually, we didn't even have a proper ball to play with. So we had this plastic ball, plastic ball that half the time it would just get really ugly in the sun. So what we would do is just cut that up and put a new ball in it to add more texture and weight so we can kick it off and it could go farther. As you can see, even some pictures, you can see some neighbors that have fence around their windows for good reasons, right? So I'm telling you this story because just our budget and our situation did not prevent us from having fun. We had to bend some rules, but we stick to the values. So what made soccer soccer? We didn't have even the goal. We sometimes would put bricks and draw on the floor to play and have fun. But outside was offside was offside, out was out. We would not touch the ball with hands and so on. And in fact, I think it was 1998, when Iran went to World Cup for the first time after a very long time, most of the people who were in that national team, that's how they played. And that's for years, this was their life. On the other hand, how many people read this article? We tried baseball, it didn't work. Check it out later. It's actually really, really funny. And it's a little bit slippery slope, but once you get over that, the author is doing a really good job in describing how to take a complex system and oversimplifying it to the point that it just doesn't make sense anymore. So the author basically talks about how he heard that baseball is fun and he should watch it and he should go play. And when he starts playing, he figures out, okay, this rule doesn't make sense. I want to play this way. I want to play that way. To the point that he starts playing with a woolen sock instead of the baseball, right? So once you get over again that slippery slope and really try to understand what the author is trying to communicate with you, is a lot of us get to these situations that we oversimplify complex system without really understanding the intricacies or the interdependencies of those systems. And then we complain that it didn't work, it failed, or Scrum doesn't work, or Agile doesn't work. So I hear that a lot. I hear people keep saying, Agile doesn't work, Agile is broken. But the question is, did Agile break, or the methodologies that we picked that broke or didn't evolve over time? So back in, how many people here have heard, like a long time ago, more so a couple decades ago, when we were working on projects, question was, what happens if the requirements change? And somebody would just say, just freeze them, right? That was a good answer of that, just freeze them so nobody can complain later. But who is responsible to get those requirements right? Is it the client? Is it the consultant? Are the engineers? Is it the stakeholder? Who is in there? Who's going to be responsible for that cost of change? Because change eventually is going to cost you some money, some time. And what happens when down the line we're actually solving a wrong problem? Who's going to be responsible for that? So all of those questions were in the heart of the debate when these practitioners got together and start working on the manifesto for Agile software development. They all had their own unique way of working. They were people who were practicing Scrum, XP, lightweight methodologies, and so on. But at the heart of it, they agreed in some values, and those values is what it became the manifesto for software agile development. So a little bit about me. I am Sarah Aslanifar. I'm a principal consultant at Equal Experts. And well, majority of my career, I've been consultant, and I absolutely loved it. I had the pleasure of working across many teams, many sectors, seeing projects that we thought it's going to fail, and it survived. The project that it survived, but the people got burned out, and those that were just purely successful, and it was really a great pleasure to be a part of it. Couple of the projects that are particularly close to my heart, I was actually part of the work on a project that was a safety critical for a utility company application. And once we finished our MVP, so bare bone, 2 days later, a disaster happened that they had to just use our MVP to reach out to the clients and to the customers about, giving them a preparation. And I got a call from our client that he said that they actually used the system, and something that would have taken them days, if not weeks, it actually took them a couple seconds to get the result back. So according to him, everybody just jumped off their chairs, and they were really happy to hear that. I was also part of another project that was the CEO's primary focus, and it was a couple years behind and a few $1 million over budget. And once we joined the team, I was there as a full-time implementation engineer. We were able to ship that software within 6 months with no data loss, no downtime, nothing. And that's because the new way that we started working together and the new way that we started communicating together. But at the heart of this, my passion is really to get teams unstuck and help them to find a sustainable pace to deliver value. So not only the project's successful, but the people are having a great time and nobody burns out and wants to leave the project. So why am I emphasizing this continuous exploration and innovation? Throughout the history, if you look back, there are so many companies that were once upon a time successful. Without naming the names, you know them, probably a few of them. What happened to them? Somebody came in out of nowhere, right? And they got crushed, they got wiped out. So sometimes they can see the change coming and they just refuse to accept. Or other times they really have no way of getting ahead of competition. So the question for you is, if you don't want to be part of that history, what do you need to do? Well, you need to answer a few questions. What is your company about? What are your values? What are you standing for? What kind of problems are you solving? And then what are things that you're not doing, but you should be doing, right? Are you still true to your client? Are you still really serving the new clients and getting those feedback, really iterating on them? And where are your features, new products coming from? Are those from clients? Are those things that you think client might need? Or purely their hippo effect, their highest paid person's opinion, somebody close the door and decide what the customer must need? And the next question is, how do you stay above competition? So let's say that you have the next great idea or heard about something great for the customer. Are you able to ship it? And are you able to test it and get feedback so you can go on by building it or capture that market? So throughout the talk, I'm going to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to talk about one of my recent projects. Actually, this was about last year, a company called Tasty Trade, which is an online brokerage firm for self-directed investors. And the CEO who wanted to do the exploratory project, something that nobody has done before, his name is Linwood Ma. So the Tasty Trade, actually, one advantage of using Tasty Trade, has anybody heard of them or played with their platform before? It's a really simple and really great platform, actually, for trading. So it allows you to set alerts. So for example, you want to be notified if stock price for wafer falls under $28 and you want to take some actions, right? So you're able to just use your system, set that alert, and when that happens, when that trend happens, you get email on your desktop, on your phone, email, whatever it is, so you can go and actually do something about it if you wish. So they already use a third-party provider, third-party service that allows them to read market data and also set some alerts to make those, set alerts on those trends. But the problem is, as for any other third-party service, integration with in-house product is really hard. And sometimes for more fine-grained alerts, those are actually quite complicated. They're not as user-friendly. So if you all probably know some programming, but let's say if my grandpa wants to go set some alerts, he doesn't want to write query, right? He just wants some UIs and clicks, and there he goes. So what is the example of a fine-grained alert is, for example, if wafer stock price falls by 5% while Amazon stays the same within the next 28 hours, you want to be notified to take some actions. So these are the problems that we're trying to solve. But the issue also, as you can imagine, thinking about the implementation, solving a query is not a big deal, right? But we have to do that end to end from the time that a candidate market data comes to the system all the way till we fire the alert within just few milliseconds, if not microseconds for 50 or 50th percentile. So what we did, sorry if the images don't show up correctly, but what we did, because this was such an exploratory project, I came up with this framework. We had an imagine, we want to quickly decide on what our scope is so that we can rally the team behind it. And we started executing and go through that feedback of, are we right? Are we getting enough data? Should we change? And so on. So this model is good when it's exploratory project. It's meant to really limit the downside risk and allow innovation, allow conversations, and quick feedback. So the goal for us was how to get from a concept to a cash cycle as fast as we could, building the right product, and I'll get back to that. So here is Linwood's Imagine. So in idea, imagine, decide. I won't go through all the steps that it takes to create with this Imagine, but if you're interested, please come and see me outside of this talk, and I'll be more than happy to provide you some references for that. But let's say we went through some filtering, right? And the idea was, can we make a better platform for the users to easily create rules and get alerted at a reasonable time when an event happens? So let's say that as soon as that market data comes in and enters our system until the email gets fired up, we're talking about single-digit millisecond. Quite fun, right? All right, so the retail brokerage business is one that every second again matters, right? Those stock actually moves in milliseconds. And we had to not only again just work with processing these queries, complicated nth degree ands or queries, but also make sure that we're working with low latency and high throughput. And as if that was not enough, we wanted to use cloud-native SaaS and PaaS where possible to make it easier for engineers to actually be able to take this and take that burden off of them as much as we possibly could. So in order to do that, we started with journey map, because I'm not a trader, full-time trader, or neither was my counterpart. So we wanted to see actually what's the day-to-day for anybody who's going to use the system, whether it's in-house traders or external traders. What is their workflow right now, and what is their North Star? Where do they want to be? So we allocated about a couple of weeks. And it might seem a lot when we talk about a 3-month project, but that 2 weeks actually really pays off. And why do I think this is important even for you, for engineers? Because I hear a lot that the requirement comes from management or from somewhere, and they're the thinkers, we're the doers. Well, when you're in that situation, when the project goes along, people cannot rally behind the cause, behind the why. So by involving people early on and allow them to put themselves in the user's foot, basically understand how they're going to use the system you're going to build, you're able to think outside of the box because you're able to pretend or imagine what they go through if they start using part of your system. So think about that next time that you're putting a project together. Make sure that you do involve designers, engineers, even QAs early on in those discussions and give them enough background into discussions of why are you building something that you're building and who is going to be using it and how. So once we did that, we actually got several features that we thought, okay, this is a North Star, and these features has to happen for us to get to that North Star. Now it's time to tighten up our scope, right? We didn't have all the time and money in the world to just do whatever we want, so we had to take some subsections of that. So we decided working on our minimum viable product. And for that, actually, I use this grid. If you're not familiar with Jeff Patton, please check out his course. It's called Passionate Product Leadership. And it's a 3-day course I very highly recommend. I always use his resources in every project that I go. So the way this works, as you can imagine, North Star, we have a lot of features. Not all of them are necessary to get that early validation when you're building a system. So we started putting in this grid, and if you don't want to use this, use the Excel. Use dollar sign for things that are high perceived value for the business, and Fibonacci or something for those that are lower complexity, and just double sort them in a way that you get the highest perceived value, but those things, those features that are lower complexity, and therefore you can get that feedback much faster. So that's what we did, and that corner up there on your right side, upside, that was our MVP. The other good thing about keeping this and actually maintaining it over time is once you start building stuff, new ideas come in, right? People think about new ways of doing things, new feature. That way you don't have to throw those away or just throw them somewhere in the backlog. You can quickly bring it in and decide where actually does this fit in. So they're not being forgotten, and also they find a good place for them. Maybe release 2, release 3, you can go back and start thinking about that new feature. So what we ended up doing from that grid, we agreed to that first 4 bullets that we can get. What that meant for us that we have early validation, that means that we can put more time, more resources, and talents to this project and really scale it up. Why did I cross ease of use? Well, because ease of use was at the end for us, it was very important, but it fell under the minimum lovable product, right? So that's that one little thing that makes the user really love that product and wants to use it. For internal traders, maybe they can write query and use our Swagger API, good for them. For outside users and for my grandpa, we needed a nice UI. And that's where that ease of use came in, that I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. Another thing that's really important when you're on exploratory projects and you're trying to innovate is to make failure be okay. Because you're going to fail, you're going to change your mind, you're going to change the way that you're doing things. And to create a very safe space for that is very important early on the project. And that is where pre-mortems come to play. So before you even go to really implementation, when you have enough data to understand what you're going to develop and what things you're going to use, imagine a fail scenario, something that could go disastrously, like it's just go wrong, and how likely is that to happen, right? Maybe 10 things go wrong, but 2 things are really highly likely to happen. Focus on those 2. Start having conversations. So this is going to create the no blame and shame culture in the team because you already have talked about it. Maybe even that helps you to architect your system a little bit differently. Use different monitoring system, use different logging, or just build it in a way that you can switch it. But also your team members are going to rehearse those conversations. They're going to think about it so that if that failure happens, they know who to contact, what to do, and how to make those switches without sitting there and blame who is responsible for this. And I really love this, before even iteration starts in the beginning of your project. So this is not going to eliminate completely postmortems, but it's definitely going to decrease it. And in fact, I would say that even if disaster happened, things just fell on its face, go back and do have that postmortems and talk about how your premortem actually helped, or maybe didn't, that postmortem. So next one is when it's time to actually make things happen. Get your hand dirty and start, just bring new tools and new services and really understand, are you still on the right track? Start executing, delivering those features, and with every feature that you develop, it's important to get some feedback as well. Sometimes you might even decide that, okay, this is not even doable, right? So that line of communication between your team and your stakeholder, your manager, is very important. If you at some point decide that this is not doable, make sure you communicate those things with your stakeholder, your project manager. It might be the times that you even need more time. So it is doable, but we're not familiar with it, therefore we need few weeks, without putting that pressure on the team to go and learn on their own. Sometimes it's good to provide that safety for them and that time for them that we value if you go back and allocate few times and actually learn something. For us, in our case, Eric, that's Eric, my counterpart, and I, we're familiar with a few technologies that Tasty Trade engineers were not. And at the same time, they were using languages and frameworks that we were not that familiar with it, like maybe not very comfortable with it. So one thing that's really important is this kind of innovations and exploratory projects is that people have to learn a lot. And sometimes when you introduce a lot of things all at once, people get burned out. And they don't really feel that win to celebrate and feel comfortable with something. So when you're in that situation, number one, make sure that you balance that exploration and exploitation. So in our case, we had to basically go back to Linwood and just tell him, hey, we have to introduce this for technology to the team, but let us exploit these things that we don't know. So give us another week or so that we get familiar with the framework, and that way we can go back and, at least the team can pick up a couple technologies and not get burned out. But again, that line of communication is very important. That's where trust happens, to be very open with your manager or somebody who's expecting a demo and tell them, hey, you're not going to see as much as you thought you're going to see in the next demo, and this is why, and this is the payoff for it. Oh, all right. Another thing is, Agile is not really an excuse for lack of documentation. So in fact, one of the fundamentals of DDD is using ubiquitous language, right? And using these diagrams, and especially visualizations, early on from in your project is very important to capture that message, the why behind you built something, and have that passed on to the future engineers or anybody else who's going to join and carry on that project. For us, not only we use all of these, actually, I really love especially the wordly mapping. We treat this project, even though it was completely exploratory, so we wanted to see even if it works, we treat it as a success. So that's why we invested a lot of time into documentation, especially ADRs. One issue that I often see when it comes to documentation is that a lot of times when I join teams, things are some in Jira, some in Google Docs, some are email, some stickers somewhere, right? And now these days, Slack, every time I ask a question, they're like, oh, search Slack. It's okay, it's just not convenient. So for me, I always make sure that I have a doc folder on the root of every project, and all the ADRs are always checked in because they're just marked down. It's really easy to check them in one place so people can always go back and understand why we chose a technology over something else. And for the rest of it, if you have to use Miro or anything else, at least make sure if they're in 20 different places, have one place in your README, like resources. Have them in one place and make sure they're available to everybody. And that way, documentations don't get lost. And also make a good habit to keep them up to date, which is very important. Because sometimes you go in and the documents are updated like 2 years ago. It's not even relevant anymore. One good practice that my counterpart Eric and I got into was to blow our environment every couple of weeks, just to go back and follow the README, the steps, and just make sure, did we get it right? Can we make it easier? And we got really good at it. So when eventually we scaled up and new engineers joined our project, they were able to just have a running project within like an hour, and then have their first PR merge into production as soon as a couple hours, as soon as they knew what they were doing. So that practice, always make sure that your documentations are up to date, so you don't forget a little command or cheat sheet stuff that you wrote for yourself but never got passed into the next team. And assess. So assess for us was when we, at the end of each iteration, or once we had something to show, that feedback cycle was extremely important, because for us, we're working with time and budget, right? So in such a short amount of time, with every feature, we want to make sure, are we in the right direction? Is this still worth spending time and money in? If not, maybe we start from scratch. Maybe the idea is not worth it. Luckily for us, we were on the right track. Many iterations had to be done, but eventually we got to where we had to be. And once we got our MVP, minimum viable product, done, that cycle of, again, feedback, to go back to the users and see how they're using that created that minimum lovable product. So at some point that we captured the users that, oh, I love this. And that moment is your minimum lovable product. So pay attention to that as well. And once for us, when we got to that minimum viable product, this took about, I would say, 6 weeks for us to say, yes, this is actually doable. We're on cloud, we're on single digit milliseconds, so it's all good. We can scale the team, bring more people. So the team grew, actually. Now, Tasty Trade engineers, they were given assigned to come join the project. We brought a designer, we brought project manager, product manager, 3, 4 other engineers. And all of that time that we put to create those documentation and blow my system up and start from scratch, it paid off. It made everybody almost immediately, they could dive in and understand why we did something we did, get all the whys behind why even this project started, all the way to deciding if they want to work in pairs or they want to work independently. Again, when you're working in that environment and it's a lot of learning involved, people learn in different ways and different pace. And you have to respect that. And you have to know that some people want to be alone, other people want to work in pairs, and always be in that communication. So for us, we did have our stand-ups, and we always had our couple hours of office hours for people to come in and ask questions. We can help them as much as we can, but also give them enough documentation that if they want to do things independently, they were more than welcome to do so. One thing that was really important for us was we were actually across the globe in time zone. We had people in India, in Poland, in London. The most problematic was New York and Chicago, because just don't get along. It's all about Chicago pizza versus New York pizza. But but despite of all of that, we made it work for us. And the cornerstone of that was really the empathy that we had for each other. It was the empowerment and the support we had for each other that really helped us to build that ethos, to be excited about learn and not be ashamed that we don't know. For us, we don't know the domain or they don't know a new technology. They were always more than welcome to come to office hours and speak. And just like that, when you think things are going really well, something will fall on its face, right, when you start scaling up. So that definitely did happen to us. So we were actually the event-driven architecture and real-time data processing. was the core of our project. So our system really depended on that. In fact, databases were like after fact, just to capture the final state of things. So what happened when we started scaling up and really try to go to market with the top 250 NASDAQ symbols instead of the top 50 and bring loads to it, our 99th percentile was not as performant, right? Just think about 50 was great, 70 was great, 99 was okay, but 99.99 was really falling on its face. And we just got together. Luckily, that postmortem that we had in the beginning of the project paid off, because one of the things that we talked about was, what if we scale and this event service, streaming service that we're using is not going to work for us anymore? And that's exactly what happened. So back then, the discussion was, okay, there are a couple other options we can do. One of them, and sorry, I cannot give you all the details, but you can see me outside. I can't talk about the details of the platform, but we decided to use a less popular and a newer to market event streaming service that was written in C. The reason we didn't choose that in the beginning was because it was so new that we were afraid if we run into problems, we will not have any support. But forwarded a couple months later, we figured out that's the right thing to do, so scrap that out, put the new system in. How long do you think that took? Any idea? 2.5 days. So for us, it was 2.5 days to go back and rip something up and put something else in. The reason for it is because we had those discussions, and we knew at some point we might have to rip this off. So we had documentation on how to do it, what pointers should we choose or should we use, and we architected the system that was so easy to do that. So don't ignore those. Also, another thing is, initially when we were working with the first system, we were actually under pressure that we're giving you a multi-year contract and this is a discounted price and you should really do it, otherwise the free trial is going to expire, you're going to lose the data. All of those pressures are always there, right? But beware of that one-way door of like signing up that multi-million dollar contract, multi-years, just to find out a little bit later when you're about to scale up and go to market, that this is not the right solution for it. So always reserve something for yourself, that reversibility to go back and not lock yourself despite of how much good stuff you get. So all of that said, I didn't introduce that framework for you to say, this is good, I'm going to go do that, right? The idea behind it is Agile is really about building the right things fast, not just building fast. So if you're following a methodology or a process that it really frustrates you and it's not moving a needle for you, that's not the right methodology for you. So if just because you adopted Spotify model or you have a Scrum Master in your team, it doesn't make it successful for you. It doesn't make it work for you if you're still not agile, if you still cannot get to market fast enough. So next time, really think about even creating your own process, creating your own methodology, whatever that works for you. But if you choose to do Agile, then stick to the values of really what Agile is, and that is iterative development, customer collaboration, responding to change, and really embrace those values within your system. Ask yourself, if you want to use Agile, is my team likely to deliver this value or this project on time using Agile methodologies, or are they better off going with more plan-based methodologies that are out there? And if Agile is the way to go, then choose something that really works for you and your team. And that's exactly what we did. We came up with our own process, something that worked for us, and that meant we didn't have grooming sessions, we didn't have story sessions, story writing sessions. It just didn't do it for us. We didn't go back and estimate every single story. We did time box them, but we didn't go back and religiously start estimation. But we kept the stand-ups, we kept the feedback cycle, and really the demos. That was really important for us to go back and make sure we get enough feedback. And with that, what is what are you going to do as a leader? One thing that, for us, we were always championed by our CTO to go explore and go learn. So when you are a leader of a team that's there to innovate, to explore, make sure that, first of all, create that safe space for people to talk and they don't blame each other. Sometimes we mistake a lack of argument and a lack of debate for things are working smooth. That's not the case, right? Especially when you're trying to work something or explore something, those debates are must. So your job as a leader, if you see that those debates don't happen, actually create them, let people talk and argue. But be careful not to take sides when those debates happen, is because if you start doing that, the people might get cold foot, or the goal might be to really come and impress you that they chose a right solution, rather than really thinking about what is the right thing to do. So your job as a leader is, even if you have the answer, just hold on to it. Ask questions, good questions in the right time to spark those debates and make the whole project owned by the team and not just by you. And that way, when you move on, or somebody else who was initially in that project move on, people can always go back and relate to that project. And that's all we had. I almost finished on time, so that's good. And yes, so here's my LinkedIn. I'll love to stay in touch and talk about some issues or some problems that you see, some challenges you have in your team. The next one is lots of case studies, actually. That particular one is case study about tasty trade that we did, but there are many other case studies there if you're interested.